A young flight instructor laughed at the old man on the runway. He didn't know about the logbook. There is a small airfield south of Greenwood, Mississippi, just off Highway 49, where the asphalt runway runs straight as a fence line and the wind off the delta blows, hot and slow even in October. The locals call it Watkins Field, after the man who has been fueling the planes there for 41 years. The official name on the FAA chart is Greenwood Municipal Auxiliary 3, but no one uses that. The hangars are tin. The office is a double-wide trailer with a window unit that hums louder than the radio. There is one Coke machine, one coffee pot, and one black Labrador named Pete who sleeps under the picnic table beside the tower steps. It is the kind of place where pilots learn to fly the way pilots used to learn to fly, with patience, with sweat, with instructors who teach because they love it more than they love the paycheck. Or that is what it used to be. On the morning of October 17th, at 9:14 in the morning, a man in a faded denim shirt and worn leather boots walked across the gravel parking lot, paused beside a 1998 Ford pickup that did not belong to him, looked up at the sky for a long moment the way old pilots do, and walked into that double-wide trailer carrying nothing but a small canvas bag. The young instructor inside the trailer did not look up. This man was Morgan Freeman. You wouldn't have known it from how he stood. He was 88 years old. His white hair was cut short under a plain blue ball cap with no logo on it. His beard was trimmed neat. He wore a gold stud in his left ear, the same one he had worn for almost 50 years, and he carried himself the way a man carries himself when he has been moving slow on purpose for so long that slow has become his natural speed. He had not come to be recognized. He had come because Raymond Cole, the man who owned the strip, had called him 3 weeks earlier and asked him a favor. Raymond was 71. Raymond had bought Watkins Field in 1989 with money he had saved running a crop dusting outfit, and he had kept the lights on through 3 recessions, 2 divorces, and 1 tornado that took the south hangar clean off its foundation. He had been quietly grateful for the last 3 years that a certain donor had been paying off the field's training scholarship for young Delta pilots who couldn't afford the $11,000 it took to get an instrument rating. Raymond knew who the donor was. He had promised never to say. The donor had finally agreed to come see the program, not to be celebrated, just to sit in the back of the classroom and listen, to see what his money had grown into. That donor was the man who had just walked through the door. The young instructor at the desk was named Tyler Macon. Tyler was 31 years old. He had 4 years of regional commercial flying behind him, a fresh CFII certificate, and the cleanest haircut in 3 counties. He wore a starched white pilot shirt with epaulets and a black tie that he had ironed that morning. He was, by every external measure, the future of this airfield. Raymond had hired him 8 months ago to run the advanced instruction track. Tyler had a way with the brochures. He had a way with the parents who wrote the checks. He had a way of standing in front of a hangar in his sunglasses that looked like the cover of a flight magazine. Tyler was on the phone when Morgan walked in. He held up one finger without looking, the universal sign of a busy man telling an old man to wait. Morgan did not mind. He set his canvas bag down on the bench by the door, took off his cap and looked around the small office. There was a chalkboard with a hand-drawn weather diagram on it. There was a coffee pot that had been on the burner too long. There was a black Labrador on the floor by the file cabinet, and Pete lifted his head, sniffed once toward Morgan, and walked over slowly with his tail dragging the floor. Morgan crouched down and scratched the dog behind the ears. "Hey there, old man," he said quietly. His voice came out the way it always came out, low and unhurried, like the first note of an upright bass. "Hot one today, ain't it?" Pete pushed his head into Morgan's hand and stayed there. Tyler finished his call. He hung up the phone. He looked at Morgan and his expression did a small thing that he probably did not even know he had done. His eyes went from Morgan's face to Morgan's denim shirt to Morgan's boots, and then back up again, and they settled into a polite blankness that was not quite a smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "Morning," Morgan said, standing back up slow. "I was told to come on out today. Raymond said there'd be a class." "A class," Tyler repeated. "Final check ride day," he called it. "Said it'd be all right if I came and watched." Tyler looked at the canvas bag on the bench. Then he looked at Morgan's cap. Then he glanced past Morgan toward the parking lot, where the only vehicle Morgan could have plausibly arrived in was Raymond's 1998 Ford pickup, which Raymond had loaned him from the office, because Morgan had asked for something low-key. "Are you a relative of one of the candidates?" Tyler asked. "No, sir." "A friend of Raymond's?" "You could say that." Tyler smiled then, the way a man smiles when he is about to be patient with someone he has decided is harmless. He came around the desk and put one hand on the back of a chair the way you would steer a tourist. "Sir, here's the thing. Today is a structured evaluation day for our advanced students. We've got 6 candidates going up for their instrument check ride. The DPE flies in from Jackson at 11. We can't really have civilians on the flight line during the practical portion. I'm sure Raymond didn't realize what today was when he invited you. He realized, Morgan said. Well, regardless, the insurance. I understand, I'll sit in the back, I won't get in the way. Tyler's smile got a little tighter at the corners. Sir, I'm going to ask you to wait in the lobby. We've got coffee out there. Maybe Raymond can come get you when there's a break. Morgan picked his bag back up. He nodded to Pete. He went out the office door and stood on the wooden steps of the trailer and looked across the runway, at the rows of small planes glinting in the morning sun. Cessna 172s mostly, one Piper, one twin-engine Beechcraft that looked like it had been somebody's pride and joy in 1979. And at the end of the row, parked by itself in the shade of the south hangar, a clean white Cessna 414 Chancellor with red trim and registration numbers that began with N7. Morgan looked at that 414 for a long time. Then he sat down on the steps next to Pete and waited. Inside the trailer, Tyler picked up the phone and called the Radio Shack across the field. Hey Earl, some old guy just walked in here saying he's here to observe the check rides, says Raymond invited him. I parked him out front. You know anything about it? The voice on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment. Earl Watkins was 64 years old. He had been the field maintenance chief and chief mechanic at this strip since 1991. He was the great-nephew of the original Watkins the field was named after. He kept his hair short and his coveralls clean, and he did not say much that wasn't necessary. Earl had been around long enough to know 2 things about this airfield that nobody else who currently worked here knew. One of those things was who paid for the scholarship program every year. The other was what kind of man that donor was when nobody was watching. Tyler, Earl said carefully. What does this fellow look like? Older black gentleman, 80s, white beard, blue cap, dinner shirt, quiet. Drove in with Raymond's pickup. There was a longer pause on the line. Tyler, Earl said, I want you to do me a favor. Go back out there. Tell that man you're very sorry. Bring him a cup of coffee. Pull a chair into the briefing room and tell him he can sit anywhere he wants. Earl, I don't know who you think that is, but I've got a check ride day to run. You're going to want to listen to me on this. Earl, with respect, I run this program now. Raymond hired me to professionalize this operation. And step 1 of that is not letting random visitors wander the flight line on evaluation days. I appreciate you looking out, but I've got it handled. Earl was quiet for a long second. All right, son, you handle it. Tyler looked at the phone. Then he looked at the schedule board on the wall. Then he looked, just for a second, out the window at the old man sitting on the steps with the dog. He shook his head and went back to his paperwork. 40 minutes later, the 6 candidates came in. They were all between 23 and 28 years old. 5 men, 1 woman. They came in laughing about something one of them had said in the parking lot, smelling like aftershave and nervous coffee, dropping their flight bags by the door the way pilots do, slipping their headsets out of their cases and setting them on the briefing table. Tyler stood at the front of the room with a marker in his hand and his epaulets straight and his clipboard ready, and he ran them through the morning briefing, the way he had run it 22 times before. Halfway through the briefing, the trailer door opened. Morgan stepped inside very quietly and sat down in the empty chair at the back of the room. Tyler stopped mid-sentence. The 6 candidates turned. One of them, a young man named Brett Holcomb who had been raised in Tupelo and had never been told to lower his voice in his life, looked Morgan up and down and said, in a stage whisper that everybody in the room could hear, "Y'all running tours today, Tyler?" A couple of the others laughed. Tyler did not laugh, but he did not shut it down either. He let it sit in the air for half a beat longer than he should have. And then he said, with a smile that was meant to be charming, "Sir, like I said, the briefing room is for candidates and instructors. I'm sure you can find a comfortable spot back in the lobby." Morgan looked at him. He didn't speak. Brett Holcomb laughed again. The young woman in the front row, whose name was Caroline Pritchard, and who had grown up in a house where her grandfather had taught her not to embarrass strangers, turned her head sharply at Brett and gave him a look. Brett shrugged. Morgan said very quietly, "Mr. Cole asked me to be here." Tyler's expression flickered, just for a second, just for half a second, because everybody in the room had heard him say the owner's name, and Tyler had not asked for it. "He asked you to be here," Tyler repeated. "Yes, sir." "In what capacity exactly?" Morgan didn't answer that. He just looked at Tyler with the patient face of a man who has been asked harder questions by harder people, and he waited. Tyler shifted his weight. "Okay," he said in a voice that was meant to sound generous, but came out sounding the opposite. "You can stay for the ground briefing. But once we go to the flight line, I'm going to need you back at the office. We've got liability concerns, I'm sure you understand. I understand. Tyler turned back to the board, but the rhythm of the briefing was off now. His marker squeaked when he wrote. He stumbled twice on a procedure he had taught 100 times. Brett Holcomb kept glancing back at the old man in the corner. Caroline did not. And in the back of the room, Morgan Freeman sat very still, with his cap in his lap, listening to the way a young instructor talks when he has decided in advance that nothing in the room can teach him anything. Outside in the radio shack across the field, Earl Watkins put down the wrench he was holding, picked up his old flip phone, and made a call. "Ray," he said, "Tyler just put your friend in the back of the briefing room like he's a tourist." "Yeah," Earl said, "I told him." He listened again. "All right," he said, "I'll keep an eye on it, but Ray, the boy's about to walk himself off a cliff. I just want you to know I tried." He closed the phone. He stood for a minute in the open hangar door, looking across the strip at the small blue ball cap visible through the trailer window. Then he picked up the wrench again and went back to work. If you've ever watched somebody set fire to their own future and not known how to stop them, you already know what's coming. Stay with me. Because what Tyler Macon does in the next 90 minutes is going to follow him for the rest of his career, and it starts in a way that almost nobody saw coming. The ground briefing ended at 10:35. Tyler dismissed the candidates to the flight line for pre-flight inspection. The 6 of them filed out into the bright sun and headed for their assigned aircraft. Tyler followed them, clipboard in hand, talking quickly to the DPE, the designated pilot examiner, who had just landed his own plane and was walking toward the trailer with his coffee mug. The DPE's name was Robert Lansing. He was 58. He had been doing check rides in Mississippi and Louisiana for 26 years. He was thin and tall, and he did not say more than he needed to say. Tyler caught up with him on the gravel path. "Bob, glad you made it. Look, before we get started, I just want to flag something. We had a walk-in this morning. Raymond apparently invited some older gentleman from his church or something to come watch the check rides. I parked him in the briefing room. Once you're ready to head out, I'm going to send him back to the lobby." Robert Lansing took a sip of his coffee. He looked at Tyler over the rim of the mug. "Older gentleman," he said. "Black fellow, white beard, gold earring?" Tyler blinked. Robert Lansing kept looking at Tyler over the rim of his mug for what felt like a long time. Then he lowered the mug and he said, with absolutely no inflection in his voice, "Yeah, Tyler, I know him." "Friend of Raymond's?" "You could say that." "Tyler," Robert Lansing said, "how long have you been at this field?" 8 months. 8 months. "Yes, sir." Robert Lansing nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has just decided that he is going to let a situation unfold on its own rather than fix it, for the person who needs it fixed. "Run your check rides, Tyler." "Yes, sir." "I'll be in the right seat of aircraft number 1 in 20 minutes. "Yes, sir." Robert walked past him into the trailer. He saw Morgan sitting in the back of the briefing room. He stopped. He took off his hat. He held out his hand. "It's been a while. How's the 414 treating you?" "She's good. Annual was 3 weeks ago, clean." "Glad to hear it." Robert glanced over his shoulder, made sure Tyler was not within earshot, lowered his voice. "You want me to?" Robert nodded once. He turned and walked back outside, and his face was perfectly neutral, and Tyler, who saw him come out, smiled at him and called something cheerful about the weather, and Robert smiled back the way you smile at somebody you have decided not to warn. The first check ride went up at 10:54. It was Brett Holcomb's aircraft, a Cessna 172, the workhorse of every small flight school in America. Brett did his pre-flight with the easy confidence of a young man who had done it 100 times. Robert Lansing climbed into the right seat with his clipboard. Tyler stood by the fuel pump with his arms crossed and watched the engine cough to life. The propeller spun up. The little blue and white plane taxied out toward the run-up area at the end of the gravel. Tyler turned to walk back to the trailer and almost ran into Morgan, who was standing on the path with his cap in his hand, watching the plane taxi. "Sir, I asked you to wait in the lobby." "You did." "Then I'm going to have to insist." Morgan looked at him, just looked, not angry, not impatient, the kind of look a man gives you when he is deciding how much room to give you to keep being wrong. "Tyler," he said, "can I tell you something?" "Sir, I really don't have time. That young man taxiing out there has got his right brake dragging." Tyler stopped. "Listen to the engine. He's having to add power to keep her moving straight. That brake caliper's hanging up, you can hear it. It's not enough to redline him on a check ride, but he's going to cook that pad before he hits 400 hours. Tyler stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh, the laugh of a young man who has heard something so unexpected that the only way he knows how to respond is to make it small. "Sir," Tyler said, "with all due respect, you can't hear a dragging brake from 200 yards away." The man just started his taxi roll. "You're standing here in a denim shirt telling me how to evaluate a check ride. I don't know what Raymond told you, but go check it after he lands. Just go check it, that's all I'm saying. Have Earl look at the right wheel when he comes back. If I'm wrong, I'll get in my truck and drive on home and you'll never see me again." Tyler shook his head. He smiled the kind of smile that has nothing warm in it. "Sir, go wait in the lobby, please." He said please the way some people say it, where the word doesn't mean please. Morgan held his eyes for one more long second. Then he walked, slow and unhurried, back toward the trailer. Caroline Pritchard had been standing 20 feet away, by her own pre-flight checklist on the wing of her 172, and she had heard the whole exchange. She watched the old man walk away. She watched her instructor turn back toward the fuel pump. She didn't say anything, but she didn't go back to her checklist for almost a full minute. The check ride lasted 46 minutes. When Brett Holcomb taxied back in at 11:42, the right main gear of his Cessna 172 was making a soft grinding sound that hadn't been there when he left. He shut the engine down, climbed out, and stood by the cowling waiting for the verdict. Robert Lansing climbed out of the right seat slowly. He pulled off his headset. He looked at Tyler. "Good," Tyler said. "But you've got a brake hanging up on the right side. He had to use a lot of left rudder on rollout. You're going to want Earl to pull that caliper this afternoon." Tyler's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "The right brake, it's binding." Yeah, we'll get Earl on it." Robert Lansing watched Tyler's face for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked away toward the trailer. Tyler stood by the wing of the airplane. He could feel the heat of the morning on the back of his neck. He could hear Pete the dog barking once at something across the field. He could see, in the corner of his vision, the old man in the denim shirt sitting on the steps of the trailer, drinking a paper cup of coffee somebody had brought him, looking at nothing in particular. The second check ride went up at 12:15. The third at 1:08. By 2:30 in the afternoon, 4 of the 6 candidates had been evaluated. 3 had passed. 1 had been failed for botching a hold entry. The wind had been picking up all morning. It had started as a steady 8 knots out of the south. By 1:45 it was gusting to 15. By 2:30 it was gusting 22 out of the south-southwest, putting almost a direct crosswind on Watkins Field's single runway. The windsock at the end of the strip was standing nearly horizontal. Caroline Pritchard was scheduled for the 5th check ride. She was the youngest of the candidates. She was 23. She had 417 hours and an instrument rating she had earned with the help of the scholarship. She was also nervous. Tyler walked her through her pre-flight at 2:45. Robert Lansing was inside refilling his coffee and reviewing paperwork. Tyler clapped Caroline on the shoulder the way coaches do. "You've got this," he said. "Just don't overthink the crosswind on landing. Hold the center line. Wing into the wind, easy." Caroline nodded. Her hand was shaking a little on her checklist. She did not want Tyler to see it. Morgan saw it. He had stood up from the steps, very quietly, and walked across the gravel to where the little Cessna 172 was parked. He came up alongside Caroline on the side opposite Tyler, who was already striding off toward the trailer to fetch the DPE. "Miss," Morgan said. Caroline turned. She was startled. She had been so focused on her checklist that she had not heard him come up behind her. "Forgive me for bothering you." "You're going to be fine." She let out a small, surprised laugh. It came out shakier than she meant it to. "Thank you, I'm not so sure about that." "Wind's getting up." "Yes, sir. 22 gusting 27, I'd say." She blinked. "How do you know that?" She looked. The windsock was indeed flapping hard. "It looks like a lot of wind." "It is a lot of wind, but it's coming steady. The gusts are clean, they're not changing direction. That's the thing to watch for, direction shift. As long as that south-southwest holds, your crab angle's going to stay the same all the way down final." "You fly?" He smiled. It was the smallest smile. "What do you fly?" "That 414 over yonder." She looked. She saw the white Cessna 414 Chancellor in the shade of the south hangar. Her eyes came back to him. "That's a twin." That's a serious airplane." "It's an airplane." She didn't know what to say, so she just looked at him. He glanced toward the trailer, where Tyler was emerging with Robert Lansing. "Miss, one more thing." "Yes, sir. Trust your instruments today, the horizon's hazy. You're going to want to chase it. Don't. Stay on your gauges. The airplane will fly the way you tell it to. Go on now." He stepped back. He walked slow as ever toward the trailer. Tyler reached Caroline just as he was leaving. He watched Morgan walk away. What did he want? "Caroline, what did he say to you?" "Nothing, Tyler, he just wished me luck." "Look, I don't want you in your head right now. Don't listen to that guy. He's just some friend of Raymond's. I don't know why he's still hanging around. You focus on your check ride, okay? Hold the center line, wing into the wind." Robert Lansing arrived at the airplane. He gave Caroline a small, professional nod, climbed into the right seat and pulled the door shut. The little Cessna 172 taxied out at 2:53. It took off into the south wind at 3:01. And at 3:38, while the airplane was at 3,000 feet, 10 miles to the northwest, the wind shifted. It was not a dramatic shift. It was the kind of shift that only matters if you happen to be coming back to a single runway in a small airplane in the next 20 minutes. The south-southwest wind that had been holding all afternoon swung, in the space of about 90 seconds, almost 90 degrees to the west, and then began gusting from the northwest at 31 knots. The windsock at Watkins Field went from straight south to twisting back and forth on itself. Tyler did not notice. He was in the trailer on the phone with a parent who was asking about enrollment for next spring. He had his back to the window. Earl Watkins noticed. Earl was on top of a ladder in the south hangar, replacing a fluorescent tube he saw the socks bin. He came down the ladder fast for a man his age. He walked out into the bright sun, looked up at the clouds, saw the line of darker gray building from the northwest that he had not seen there at noon, and felt the temperature drop a full 3 degrees on his bare arms in the span of one breath. Earl walked fast toward the trailer. He passed Morgan, who was sitting on the steps again, looking up at the sky. Morgan did not look at Earl. He just said low, "It's a frontal passage about 6 minutes out." "I know it is. Caroline's at 3,010 miles northwest. She's going to fly right into the front coming home." "I know she is." Tyler doesn't. "You need to get on that radio." Earl went up the trailer steps in one stride. He pushed the door open. Tyler was still on the phone. Earl walked across the office, took the phone out of Tyler's hand and said, "Ma'am, this is Earl Watkins. I'm going to have to call you back." "Earl, what the—" "Wind shift, northwest 30 plus, front's 6 minutes out. You've got a student 10 miles northwest at 3,000 and the DPE in the right seat." Tyler's mouth opened. He saw the windsock. He saw the dark line of cloud. His face changed. Not in panic. Worse, in the slow dawning realization of a man who has just understood that something is about to happen that he does not know how to handle. Okay. I'm going to call her on the radio. Tell her to expedite back, land before the front." Earl said very quietly, "Tyler, that front'll beat her here. Then she'll divert. Greenwood LaFleur is 15 miles east. She can. The front's moving east. Greenwood LaFleur is going to be IMC in 12 minutes. Tyler's hands started to shake. He was looking at the radio. He was a young instructor. He had 4 years of regional commercial flying. He had taught instrument procedures dozens of times. And he had never, in his life, had to talk a frightened 23-year-old student through a real-time weather emergency over a radio, with a designated pilot examiner in the right seat watching him do it. The trailer door opened. Morgan walked in. He did not look at Tyler. He walked past him to the radio. He sat down in the chair in front of the mic. He adjusted the volume knob. He picked up the handset. He keyed it once, twice, getting a feel for the squelch. And then, in that voice that had narrated half the documentaries Tyler had ever watched on a Sunday afternoon, he said, "November 724 Delta Foxtrot, this is Watkins ground. You got me, Caroline?" There was a pause. The radio crackled. A young woman's voice came back, tight and clear. "Watkins ground, 724 Delta Foxtrot, go ahead." "Caroline, listen, we got a front coming through. Wind's gone northwest 31, gusting higher. I need you to do exactly what I tell you. You with me?" "Yes, sir." "Where are you right now?" 3,010 miles northwest inbound. I just saw the wall cloud." "Good. You're going to turn left, heading 270, and you're going to climb to 4,500. You're going to fly underneath the leading edge, not into it. Robert's going to back you up on instruments. Confirm. Left 270, climbing 4,500. "Caroline." "Yes, sir." "Trust your gauges." There was a half-second pause, and then Caroline's voice came back, steadier than it had been a minute ago. "Yes, sir." The radio clicked off. Morgan set the handset down. Tyler was standing behind him, his face was white. "Who?" Tyler said. "Who are you?" Morgan did not answer. He picked the handset back up. "November 724 Delta Foxtrot, Watkins Ground. In 4 minutes I want you to start a slow descent, 800 feet a minute. You're going to come in west of the field. You're going to overfly the strip at 1500, and you're going to enter a left downwind for runway 32. Yes, I know runway 32 doesn't exist. The wind's 180 degrees off your departure heading. You're going to land on the same strip going the other way." Robert's got the chart. Earl was at the window. He was watching the sky. The line of dark cloud was very close now. Morgan keyed the radio again. "Caroline, one more thing." "Yes, sir." "Your crab angle's going to be about 12 degrees right. Hold it all the way down. Don't kick it out till you're 3 feet off the deck. Wing into the wind. Slow hands." "Yes, sir." He set the handset down. The trailer was silent except for the hum of the window unit. Tyler had not moved. Earl said from the window, "Front's 2 minutes out." Morgan stood up from the chair. He picked up his cap from the desk where he had set it down. He put it back on his head. He turned and looked at Tyler, and Tyler was looking at him the way a man looks at a stranger he has just realized was never a stranger. "Sir," Tyler said, "I'm sorry." Morgan did not answer right away. He looked at Tyler for what felt like a long time. "Let's go watch her land, son." They went outside. The wind had changed entirely. It was cold now. It smelled like rain. Pete the dog was under the picnic table with his ears flat. Robert Lansing's voice came across the open frequency in short bursts as he confirmed Caroline's headings. The other candidates had come out of the lobby. Brett Holcomb was there. The 2 other men who had already passed. The one who had failed. They were standing in a small group near the fuel pump, looking up at the sky. Caroline's Cessna 172 appeared as a small white shape against the dark cloud bank at 3:51. She overflew the field at 1,500 feet on a westerly heading, banked left, came around onto a downwind for what was now, functionally, runway 32. She was crabbed hard against the crosswind. The little plane looked sideways in the sky. She turned base. She turned final. She held the crab. The wing dropped into the wind. She touched down on the upwind main gear first, exactly the way the textbook says to, ran the tailwheel down, kept the right wing low all the way through the rollout, and brought the airplane to a stop 220 feet down the runway. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Earl Watkins took his cap off and held it over his heart, just for 1 second, in the way that an old man does when he has just watched a young woman do exactly what she was supposed to do. The taxi back took 3 minutes. Caroline shut the engine down. She sat in the left seat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Robert Lansing said something to her quietly. She nodded. They both climbed out. Caroline walked toward the trailer. She walked past Tyler, who said her name, and she did not turn. She walked up to Morgan, who was standing on the gravel path with his cap in his hand. "Sir," she said. "You did fine." She started to cry, not big tears, just a couple. She wiped them away with her sleeve, embarrassed. "Nothing to be sorry for. I don't even know your name." Robert Lansing, who had come up behind her, said very quietly, "Caroline, this is Mr. Morgan Freeman. He's been paying for your scholarship the last 3 years." She turned and looked at the old man in the denim shirt and the worn boots and the blue ball cap. She did not know what to say. So she didn't say anything. She just put her hand on his arm and held it there for a long moment. Morgan put his hand over hers. "Go on inside, child, you're shaking." She went. Brett Holcomb was watching from the fuel pump. So were the others. So was Earl. So was Pete. So was Tyler. Tyler was standing on the gravel path with his epaulets crooked and his clipboard down by his side and his face a color it had not been an hour ago. He had heard Robert Lansing say the name. He had heard him say what the name meant. He had watched the woman he had told not to listen to the old man go and put her hand on the old man's arm. He did not say anything. Morgan walked over to him. The 2 of them stood together on the gravel for a moment. "Sir," Tyler said, "I owe you." "You don't owe me anything." "Walk with me a minute, son." They did not go far. They walked to the end of the row of small airplanes, to where the white Cessna 414 Chancellor sat in the shade of the south hangar, and Morgan stopped beside it. He laid his hand on the cowling the way you lay your hand on a horse you've ridden a long time. "She's a good airplane," he said. Tyler nodded. He couldn't speak. "Twin engine, pressurized, 8 seats. I bought her in 2007. I've put a little over 4,000 hours on her since, mostly between Mississippi and California. Yes, sir. I got my private license in 2002. I was 65 years old. You know what people told me when I started? No, sir. They told me I was too old. They told me my hands weren't steady enough. They told me I'd get up in the airplane the first time and panic. They told me I should hire somebody to fly me places, because I had the money, and that's what people with money do. Morgan looked at the airplane, not at Tyler. I had an instructor down in California, young fellow, about your age. First lesson he told me to keep my hands off the yoke until he said otherwise. Treated me like I'd never seen the inside of an airplane before, which I hadn't. He was right to do that. But he was also wrong about a few things he didn't bother to ask about. He turned and looked at Tyler. I had been in the United States Air Force in 1955, radar mechanic. I'd been around airplanes for almost 50 years before I ever sat in the left seat. Didn't make me a pilot, but it meant I knew what I didn't know, and he never asked. Yes, sir. I'm not angry with you. Sir, you should be. I'm not. Listen to me now. Listen close. There's a thing that happens to young men in this business. You come up through it, you do well. You get your ratings. You get your hours. And somewhere along the way you start to think the thing that matters most is looking like you know what you're doing. So you put on the white shirt, you iron the tie, you speak with confidence, you shut down people who you've decided don't belong in the room, and you start to believe that confidence is the same thing as competence. Yes, sir. It isn't. No, sir. What that girl did just now, that landing, that wasn't confidence. That was a young pilot who was scared out of her mind doing exactly what she was trained to do because she trusted her instruments and she trusted the voice on the radio. That's competence. And the reason it worked is because Robert Lansing was sitting in the right seat watching her without saying a word. And the reason it worked is because Earl Watkins came down off that ladder when he felt the temperature drop. And the reason it worked is because 3 years ago, some old man wrote a check so she could afford an instrument rating in the first place. Yes, sir. None of which makes any one of us special. It just means we were all doing our jobs at the same time. Yes, sir. You weren't doing your job today, son. No, sir. You weren't doing your job because you'd already decided who was in the room. And there's nothing wrong with you that a few more years and a couple of harder days won't fix. But you've got to start asking. You've got to start asking people who they are before you tell them where to sit. Yes, sir. Tyler's eyes were wet. He was not the kind of man who cried easily, but he was also not the kind of man who had been talked to like this in 8 years. I'm going to lose my job, aren't I? Morgan looked at him for a long time. That's between you and Raymond. Yes, sir. But I'll tell you what I'm going to tell Raymond when he asks me. I'm going to tell him I think you ought to stay. Tyler stared at him. I'm going to tell him you ought to stay, and you ought to work under Robert Lansing for a year, and you ought to spend that year asking every single person who walks onto this field who they are, and what they fly, and how long they've been at it. I'm going to tell him that at the end of that year, if you've done the work, you can have your program back. And I'm going to tell him that I will personally pay for the next 3 years of the scholarship program out of my own pocket, on one condition. What's the condition, sir? That you teach 2 of those scholarship students yourself, free of charge on your own time every year, forever. Tyler did not answer for a long moment. Yes, sir. Look at me, son. Yes, sir. Don't let me down. No, sir. Morgan put his hand on Tyler's shoulder just for a second. Then he turned and walked, slow as ever, back toward the trailer. 6 weeks later, on the 1st of December, Raymond Cole signed the papers extending the Watkins Field Delta Pilot Scholarship for another 3 years. The funding came from a private donor whose name was not disclosed in the press release. Tyler Macon was reassigned to the assistant instructor position under Robert Lansing. He spent his first morning in the new role pulling brake calipers off a Cessna 172 with Earl Watkins in the south hangar. Caroline Pritchard got her commercial certificate 8 months later. She went on to fly medical transport out of Memphis. She still comes back to Watkins Field twice a year to teach a Saturday class to the next round of scholarship students. She does not charge for it. Brett Holcomb did not become a pilot. He went into corporate sales in Dallas. He is by all accounts doing well. Earl Watkins is still at Watkins Field. He is 65 now. He says he will retire when somebody as good as him shows up to replace him, which he says will probably be never. Morgan Freeman flies back to Mississippi every spring in his white Cessna 414. to spend a week visiting the airfield, the bee yard, and the blues club in Clarksdale. He is 88 years old. He still takes the left seat. He still files his own flight plans. He still answers the radio with the same calm voice he answered it with on the afternoon of October 17th. On a porch on the south side of the trailer at Watkins Field on a warm evening in May, Tyler Macon sits on a wooden bench beside an old man in a denim shirt watching the sun set over the Mississippi Delta. There is a coffee cup in Tyler's hand. There is a black Labrador asleep at his feet. The wind is steady out of the south, 8 knots, the kind of wind that means tomorrow morning is going to be a good day for flying. Tyler does not speak. Neither does Morgan. They have been sitting there for almost half an hour. After a while Morgan stands up, he stretches his back, he picks up his cap. "I'll see you in the morning, son." "Yes, sir." "You got the 8 a.m. pre-flight?" "Yes, sir." "Don't be late." "No, sir." Morgan walks toward the parking lot, slow and unhurried, the way he has been walking for 88 years. He does not look back. Tyler watches him go. Some people learn the lesson in a classroom. Some people learn it in a logbook. Some people learn it standing on a gravel path in Mississippi on a windy afternoon. In October, watching a 23-year-old woman put her hand on the arm of a man whose name they did not bother to ask. The lesson is always the same. You do not get to decide who belongs in the room until you have asked them who they are. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment with what you took from it. And if you know someone who could use a reminder that quiet people often carry the most weight, share this with them today. This story is a work of fiction created with the assistance of AI for the purpose of sharing positive messages and life lessons. It is inspired by Morgan Freeman's well-known reputation for wisdom, his real love of the Mississippi Delta, his beekeeping passion, his pilot's license, and his commitment to his southern community. The events, characters, other than Morgan Freeman himself, locations and dialogue depicted are entirely fictional and not intended to represent or target any real individual, business, or organization. Any resemblance to actual events or persons other than Morgan Freeman is purely coincidental.